Welcome back.
Technical difficulties, man.
Uh, yeah, we apologize for the small inconvenience, like performance issues.
That's something you don't want to hear.
Well, welcome to the fourth episode of The Abstract Truth.
Damn right.
And for today's episode, what do we have, brother?
In a silent way from the
Mm-hmm.
brother Miles Davis.
From the Brother Miles. Brother Miles had an extensive career, starting out with Charlie Parker way back in the late 40s and ending in 1991 when he passed away.
That isn't that crazy. That's how like every artist should desire to go out, you know.
That is the desired outcome, to have a career that's as extensive and as um, magnificent, honestly, because that we're talking about somebody that had probably the greatest career in music history. Somebody,
Possibly, at least in like the Western sense and like modern times.
mhm.
So
Somebody who not only created new horizons in music, he expanded on those, bringing innovation, bringing new sounds, new soundscapes, and new musicians to the forefront. Many of the most famous jazz musicians of today would have not been here if it wasn't for the great Miles Davis.
absolutely.
And we're including Herbie Hancock, Tony Williams, Chick Corea, Jack DeJohnette, Ayrton Moreira, Dave Holland, Ron Carter, and many more.
John Coltrane, John
Mhm.
McLaughlin.
Even George Benson, who had a small
Great.
appearance in Miles in the Sky, which I
Um,
believe is the record that came, if not right before, then maybe two records before in a silent way.
and what's his name? Sorry, it's I'm checking this thing out. um, see, no, Wayne Shorter.
Hmm.
Yeah,
This is actually a good
Wayne
topic
Shorter's on this record. Yeah.
to start the discussion. So Wayne Shorter had not joined the quintet until ESP was released.
Hmm.
So, for example, there is the recordings of My Funny Valentine and Four and More, which all had every member of the quintet except for Wayne Shorter. In his place was saxophone player George Coleman,
Yes.
who also had an interesting style, but a lot more similar to John Coltrane than Wayne Shorter had. Still,
Yeah. Wayne Shorter's unique, absolutely, all in his own way.
he man, he broke I'd say he broke new ground in jazz saxophone. I mean, Coltrane was sort of the one that initiated this movement towards bringing the saxophone into an organic instrument, right? Charlie Parker was very dynamic with his saxophone, while Coltrane was very organic. His instrument felt like it was alive and breathing,
Hmm.
while Wayne Shorter was about combining the subtleties of all those that came before him into something mysterious and, above all, intriguing.
Yeah. Wayne Shorter is definitely one of those guys. And I think that when you get to the electric period and, from the point of departure from John Coltrane, he doesn't shy away. I mean, you don't really know unless you're got interviews, which I haven't really seen or listened to, read any interviews. When you take a place in Miles' band and you're replacing someone who's iconic as John Coltrane, you imagine that it's something that you may be a little intimidated by. So,
Oh,
but
was
the thing
def-
about Wayne Shorter is he just new directions completely, and it's remarkable. I think
and
what he
you could
accomplished.
feel that throughout both ESP and even Miles Smiles. Some of the tracks that were actually composed by Wayne Shorter, the most famous one of them being Footprints, which
Yeah.
already had its debut. in his Blue Note release, Adam's Apple. Now, that one is,
You have the Blue Note Tone Poet?
yes, I do. Not the Tone Poet, it's a classic vinyl.
Right.
So, that song is just a blues. And in that record, it was represented by a jazz waltz, while the arrangement that we hear in Miles Smiles is a lot more, how do I describe it? It's almost like a labyrinth of sounds. You have all these giants of music essentially almost colliding into each other, but not really. It's like teamwork that feels so effortless that it almost feels like it's clashing, but not quite.
Yeah.
It's in perfect harmony, which
I think
might be what gave the album its name and what gave the album its recognition.
yeah. Now in regards to In a Silent Way, I think just the use of electric guitar, electric piano, it's all something new, but it's something that really speaks to Miles Davis's ambitions as an artist, as someone who is ready to push towards something new. Uh I feel like in a sense that Miles Davis is never worried about tradition, whereas, some people, like we were talking about last week, there are some people who are very traditional in the sense of, maybe they come out of like the British invasion, for example. A lot of those bands sounded the same,
Hmm.
but Miles Davis always had his own style, had his own thing going on. I felt like if you are capable and if you're lucky enough to be in the band, uh, there are no boundaries, there are no limits.
And one thing that always struck me about Miles's process of selecting new band members, there's an interview with, I think if I'm not wrong, it was Herbie Hancock,
Hmm.
where he got the call. Right, he at the time was living with Donald Byrd. They were roommates, and Donald Byrd told him that Miles Davis was looking for a new band member, a new piano player, and he was interested in Herbie Hancock.
Right.
He later got a call from none other than Tony Williams, who told him to appear before Miles's home and basically jam with them. And once he went there, he realized that Miles was not in the booth. So all the musicians, and I'm talking Tony Williams, Ron Carter, and Wayne Shorter, they were all in the booth except for Herbie
Miles.
Hancock. And once he got there, he realized that the reason why Miles was missing in that session wasn't because he didn't want to play with them. Miles was actually upstairs with producer Teo Macero, and the reason why he did that is because he didn't want Herbie to feel intimidated by his presence. He wanted the band to play as freely as possible, and
Mm.
that always strikes me is that friendliness that Miles had to his bands, where you expect
Oh,
somebody who's as towering of a figure as the Prince of Darkness himself. And once you get to the studio to record with his band, you realize he's not even there. He wants you to feel at home because he wanted every member of his band to be his own individual. And that's one of the greatest aspects of not only the transitional period between ESP, Miles in the Sky, Fails the Kilimanjaro. You can see that free spirited idea of making new sounds, making music that didn't sound like music, and you can hear sort of what I like to call the culmination of that transitional period and the beginning of something new, something more nuanced and something more abstract. As you were mentioning, In a Silent Way was the first record that had heavy use of tape modulation, overdubs, and all of the recording techniques previously seen on the British Invasion. Now were transferred into jazz, creating the genre of jazz fusion.
Yeah, I feel like at this point still, I mean, personally, I don't really see it as fusion. I mean, I don't like to see it as fusion, you know. I don't know. I don't really dig that word. So, um it's just Miles, man. I don't want to say it's jazz fusion or anything, but like to me, you put on in a silent way. Oh, it's just there's nothing equivalent to that in the sense of the music or the feeling that it gives. So I feel like it just goes back to the same thing that I said earlier. Miles is always done his own thing and he sets the standard and he doesn't really follow the standard. Um
He sort of does like betray himself in his own world of musical creativity.
and it's always Miles always sounds like Miles, you know. And it's just when he gets a new group, and you know these guys are all young guys right now in this period on this record.
I believe by the time this record was released, Miles was already almost reaching his 50s, and all the musicians in his bands were barely in in their 30s, I think.
Mm. Yeah, isn't there that clip of Herbie Hancock playing with Miles and like Herbie's like 16 or something?
Yeah, that one's from Teatro del Arte. That one is a fantastic live performance
Yeah,
with the quintet. So
right.
you have everyone in there, they're performing, and there's a famous part where, and Herbie did talk about this in his interview, where he messed up the chords. And what Miles did is he played something that made Herbie's brown chord sound right, which goes to show that Miles is always looking for new ways to change his sound and change his music. He famously refused to play his older compositions. So the stuff that basically made him famous, like Kind of Blue or Someday My Prince Will Come, all those albums for him were essentially dead. He wanted something new. He wanted always to push the envelope to
And
show
that's
that music is alive, it's organic. And since music is organic, it always keeps moving.
that's one of my favorite quotes, you know, like there are no mistakes, you know, for Miles. Like you could play something obviously being if you're in the band, you're not going to make such a big fucking mistake that it's going to ruin the whole song. But I imagine, you know, you maybe you hit a wrong note here and there, but and it makes a different chord. Say, for example, if you're playing on the piano or keyboard and someone hears that, I'm sure someone's gonna play off of that and just it's go with the flow, man. That's really I think what it comes down to is how good can you improvise, how fast can you think on your feet, and
How much can you think ahead? Because that's
and
big reason, big part
and
of
if
it.
you could play with your with some soul.
Well, Wayne Shorter was known for interpreting, and this is something that Miles really dug back in the day, is he loved Wayne's appreciation for the blues, and you can hear this appreciation for the blues in almost everything they played. You can hear the blue note, you can hear um, all the classic Charlie Parker blues slicks. You can hear them all throughout the many compositions of the band. And this is something interesting. Coming to the release of In a Silent Way, a lot of the albums from the transitional period, and I'm thinking back to Nefertiti and um, Miles,
Hmm.
is that a lot of the compositions were not even Miles's compositions. He wanted the band to create their own compositions and bring them up and play them for whatever recording was being made at the time. And for example, in The Sorcerer, many of the compositions are either Wayne Shorter's, Ron Carter's, or even I think Pee Wee. It's a composition by Tony Williams.
Hmm.
And that was the vibe. It was he was Miles, but he wasn't the leader of the band, as he was just another element to make the band whole. And you can hear this throughout In a Silent Way. and we can start to transition into that wonderful side A, or peaceful.
Hey man, I gotta say though, at this point too in time when you think about it, I feel like the rock bands are they're not really obviously they're not capable of performing jazz or composing anything near it. Um, but these two genres begin to intertwine, and you hear the influence from rock start to touch Miles, and you hear Miles. I feel like it's like, oh shit. I don't know. If I were in a rock band and if I were to hear fucking In a Silent Way, I would be inspired. I mean, still, this album is one of my favorite Miles Davis records, probably top three for me. Um, it's it's just kind of a statement, I think, for him to go so out there and just go for something new that obviously he had no fear for trying anything new. And I think that the way that everyone plays on this record is with complete confidence going forward. They're all confident in their abilities, and no one overdoes it. No one steps on their toes. That's what I like about this record. It's not too busy.
You know,
Everyone's just
I was having a
ooh.
conversation with a friend of mine, Joshua. He's a trumpet player, and we were talking about this album, and we were talking about I Love Supreme and Bitches Brew.
Uh-huh.
And one thing that he mentioned to me that I fell in agreement with, he told me, I think that the statement that Miles was trying to make was made essentially within a silent way, with Bitches Brew just being the follow up to that, and sort of the more operatic, the more grand in scale, while in a silent way it was always meant to be that nuance, s- that sort of soft spoken beginning of the hero's journey.
Yeah, that's interesting way to see it too. I
Yeah.
I mean, not to mention this is a great record to get stoned to.
Oh, this is a fantastic record to get stoned to,
Yeah.
but then again, any record from the electric period is fantastic to get stoned to.
Yeah, but I mean, I'd be a little weary if I were to go on to Bitches Brew.
Oh man, I've listened to that so many times. Like Far as Dance feels like it's 5 minutes long to me now.
Yeah.
Also on the corner, that one's a trip. I gotta say. Let's talk about that first track, and Tony Williams. He keeps the same groove for 20 minutes straight. It is surprising. It is striking when you hear it the first time. He's not moving. It's the same groove, and
And they
he's
just groove
letting
on it.
and he's just letting everyone else sit right on top of it. It almost feels like Tony is like this cloud of sound, and everyone's sitting right on top. All that water is sitting right on top of it, and there's no pressure. There is no overwhelmingness. Everyone's just sitting there, and you can hear that when Joe Zawinul, who's playing organ and on the
Mhm.
electric piano on this record, you can hear the way he sits right on top of that groove, and he plays the blues on top of it, letting all the other musicians, including John McLaughlin and Wayne Shorter, kind of just go along at their own pace. And that whole side A, it just feels like it's not trying to blow you away. It's not trying to knock your socks off. It's trying to send you a message. It's trying to tell you something. This
Mhm.
is what we do. This is who we are, and this is the music that we meant for you to listen to.
Tyrese says that Tony is the lake, and the rest of the band is riding him.
The rest of the band, it's like a canoe on that lake.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
beautiful. Really.
I think what makes this record flow a lot better than other Electric Period records is the ambience and the space between the different solos and the different players. Uh, I don't feel like anyone comes in so abruptly, and when they do, it's at the point where it sounds good, it sounds perfect. That's why it's like this record is one of the most like, oh, it's such a good record because when you get to the point of climax, it's like it's so good. You've been waiting for it the whole time, and the way it builds up, it it pays off so good.
And speaking of those solos, probably my favorite transition is when Wayne Shorter enters the picture, and he enters the track by simply playing a couple of notes that you can hear the producer. I think, if I'm not wrong, this
Is
comes
Dale
comes up and
Mustaine.
comes up in volume, right? And
Hmm.
he's just playing those little notes, da 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 da. And
Hmm.
it's so Wayne Shorter. It, like, once you hear it, you're like, that's him. That's how he should sound. That's like clean cut Wayne Shorter. That's his sound. And it's so original and at the same time so personal.
Yeah, I think my favorite song is side two, Silent Way.
Well, the title track is obviously sort of the actual statement. I'd like to think of
Oh
peaceful
yeah,
as the preparation, right? This is what you get in preparation for what comes next. And you can hear some of those influences, especially on some of the notes that Miles is playing in his solo, right? Where he's basically keeping it in that they're playing, if I'm not wrong, they're playing Dorian the whole time, and Miles keeps his solo sort of relaxed. He keeps himself. He does not playing too many notes. He's not playing too many rhythms. Most of what he's doing is ideas, and this is something that I remember. I was having a conversation with my drum professor, Francisco Mela, and he was telling me when you're trying to play something that's free, you have to stop thinking of the conventions of time and the conventions of space and what you're going to do with that space, because playing free means playing to ideas, and Miles's ideas throughout the whole song and throughout the whole record just speak to the intention that he had for this record to be.
yeah. I think the combination of each musician, because you hear that a lot on this record between the and this record to say is a great example of guitars and pianos playing together well, because you hear on so many records where they do have electric guitar and pianos and whatever, it's very easy, and if you've ever played with them too, you can hear that it's very hard to get along with that other instrument because they're almost doing the same things, you know? Um, so I think that between Herbie Hancock, Chick Corea, John McLaughlin, and even Dave Holland, when they play together as a rhythm section, it's not as busy as I said earlier. So it feels way open, and the way that Miles plays over it, him and Wayne, it's fucking good.
And also the overdubs on this record. In a silent way, it starts out with a note on the organ by Joe Sano,
Hmm.
and they grab that piece of the recording and paste it later onto the song. Once everyone's finished soloing, they just paste that intro again, and it's something that they do for both tracks, where they grab the intro, which is was essentially all they're all jam sessions. They grab this jam session and they're like, this is gonna be the intro for the record, and this is how we're gonna start it. This is how we're going to end it, and the way they start and the way they end is almost the same, except for some of the subtleties inside of it. For example, some of the solos are just slightly different or they're slightly more extended, and uh the players, and this is something that you like you were saying, the chemistry between the players. John
Yeah.
McLaughlin always has strike me as somebody that loves to play more to lines than he loves to play to clusters, right? He's very line oriented, and you can hear
Yeah, he's more
this.
linear. He's not a very scattered
Mhm.
player. I think he goes off of a lot of the chords from the pianos,
Y-
and
And you know what I like is you can hear that interplay. And of course, Miles Davis, he absolutely loved John McLaughlin's playing so much that he got his own title track in Bitches Brew.
right.
And you can hear that chemistry between the two of them once Miles is soloing and John is comping. They both play off of each other's ideas. There is no set course for either. It's just I hear something, I quote you on it, or I play something that's slightly different, and then you hear something from me and you do the same thing.
Yeah. So when I first heard this record, I was like, it really struck me as probably one of the most important records I'd ever heard in my life. Um, it was just so beautiful. So immediately, like, I felt like I grabbed onto it, and it was something that I didn't want to listen to again and again and again so many times because I didn't want to overplay it and lose that
And
beauty.
you know, man, what's very interesting is the contrast between side A and side B. So much that I've actually had people that I've shown the record to, and it's to the point that it's polarizing. Like they either prefer one side or the other. I haven't met anybody outside of our group of friends who likes the record as a whole. Most people either like side A or side B that I've talked to, and it's a weird thing because for me, and probably for you as well, they're both coexistent. One cannot exist without the other, but they're both certainly very different. And I think that's part of the intention of the track is to make two entirely different tracks that essentially play of each other's ideas while being their own universe of musicality and chemistry and composition and just creativity.
For me, also too, I felt like obviously I was really into rock before I was into jazz, and I felt like this record was one of the records that was like, if you're into rock, you can really get behind this record even more, right?
For me, well, also mostly came from like that rock background, and I was playing a lot of Led Zeppelin and Metallica and AC/DC and some Latin American bands like Soda Stereo or Caramelos de Cianuro from Venezuela.
Mhm.
And man, I think, uh, and I actually didn't hear this record until a little later on when I got a copy of it and I listened to it. I realized like the influences that this record had on the music that came after, and the influences of rock, of psychedelic music, of even jam sessions and jam music.
Right.
You can get behind not the genre, not you can get behind the record not because of the genre, but because of the message, because this is Miles's way of saying that his music had no frontiers, it had no borders, it had no set standard that we're going to do, and this is sort of where we're going to stay for the whole thing. It was alive, it was organic, and this record was his way of saying, well, jazz as we knew it, it's just that straight ahead blue note jazz that we've heard from 1950 to 1969, that it's essentially dead. And he was heavily criticized at the time. He was called a sellout. He was called somebody that's trying to appeal to the rock audiences or appeal to the mainstream instead of keeping the tradition alive, which has always puzzled me because I'm very much against that way of thinking of like the tradition is the best.
Yeah,
For me, obsolescence is obsolescence, and something that's dead is something that's dead. And you're not
obviously,
gonna bring it back.
it's not that the music was dead, so to say, but like someone's got to do it, and if you're gonna do it, just why not go out all the way and explore uncharted territories, so to say, right?
Yeah,
Um, from like I wanted to mention, going back to like the rock influence and who influenced who, it doesn't really matter, I guess, but uh I think specifically listening to the later parts of both of the songs when they get into the real jamming, uh it feels more like something that you would hear. I always thought that like the end of Rolling Stones Bitch from Sticky Fingers sounded similar to this record. So if you, I don't know if you're familiar with the song, if you want to go back and check that song out later, you kind of hear there's uh, I kind of hear, I don't want to say it's a direct influence because I don't know, but personally, I hear similarities in the rhythm
hmm
and in the bass melodies that they play. The dun 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 dun
and
dun 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 dun, and that
also
it's just the jamming, man.
on track two on in a silent way, you can hear there is two separate influences going on in that track that I really really like, and one of them is the clear Motown influence of the vamp that they do sort of in the middle towards the end where the or Joe Sonnell with the organ, he goes into this line, but da 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 da
Mhm.
da da, and it's just that one chord vamp. That's what they're doing,
Yeah, that's
and
the part I'm talking
they just all go with that flow into, okay, this is where we're moving, and we're staying here for a little bit, and
that's
everyone's just doing
my
their
favorite
thing.
part. I like when it gets to that, it's 4/4 just rocking. I like it. I like it a lot. It's something that I think it's not exactly traditional rock, maybe, but it's just so unique in
It
its own
has
way.
it has a little bit of the rock influences. It has a lot of the Motown influences from the mid '60s to late '60s, and it also just comes into its own at the end of
Mhm.
the day. And I like those contrasting lines between the same song, where you have that initial keyboard lick, da 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 doo, doo,
Yeah,
doo,
that's
and
the
then
other
that,
part.
yeah, that merges into that next vamp section, and it all blends together so effortlessly.
Seamlessly. Yeah.
Yes, and by the time the cutoff happens and they go back to the initial section, it's almost unexpected. It's like it just happens like that, and you're caught off guard, right? Because that's part of the innovation of the record. It's like that's the tape modulation, that's the overdubbing, that's Tia Macero just going in saying, "We're gonna go cut this part, put it right here at the end, and it's gonna be all abrupt. You're not gonna see it coming."
Yeah. The production is obviously also too, as a guitar player, John McLaughlin, the production on it is very subtle and clean. Obviously, I feel like he's got to be using Fender amps and Fender guitars. I think I looked into it once. They were saying he was using like a Mustang or something, Fender Mustang, with
Well,
a Princeton, I think.
hmm
So small amp, small guitar, single coils. It definitely doesn't sound like humbuckers. Um, so the guitar on this record, I think, probably is the most important, other than Miles, and just the
and
fact that they have the instrument on this track, and
it's
it's
also
it's not
the
playing jazz guitar. He's not doing um Grant Green. He's not doing Django. He's not doing any of the traditional stuff. And I think that's where John McLaughlin really, gets separated from the traditional bop and what's the rest? Just all that other stuff, the swing eras, and John McLaughlin is more of a rocker guy. That's why, I love the record he did with Santana. I
and
love
and you know what's so inspiring about that is that you can still hear sort of like the commencement of like what will later become the John McLaughlin we know from the Mahavishnu Orchestra
yeah,
and the work that he did later on, where you can hear the tone is definitely there, right? But that dirt that he had on his later recordings, it's still not there, and it's sort of finding its way onto it. But that's sort of like the beauty of it because John McLaughlin is the new guy, right? He's the new guitar. He's the guitar player for the first time. Miles Davis is gonna have an electric guitar player in his band, not discounting George Benson's appearance in Paraphernalia,
yeah.
but for the first time, the band is going to have a guitar player, and the guitar player is not just going to be a comping instrument or a comping mechanism and a
It's the lead
tool.
instrument.
It's the lead. It's right there, right besides Miles, right besides Wayne Shorter, right besides Tony. It's right in there, and that tone that he has so unique for that record, and so incredibly John McLaughlin that by the time you hear him later on the other recordings, for example, I want to draw attention to a later release in the Electric period, Jack Johnson, where you can hear that tone almost fully formed, right? That's
He
that
takes
record that came.
more of a dirty tone on Jack Johnson, though. It's
Yeah, and
more,
and a lot more of a straight like just rock influence, rock and blues.
yeah, yeah. So we got a guy, Papa Sullivan, asking about Dave Holland on bass for this record. I think he's holding this whole groove down with Tony. So
Oh,
between
he's
him and
like
Tony, the pocket is just fucking amazing, dude. It's interesting because they're not playing so fast, and it's not. I mean, but besides Tony is, but it doesn't feel like he is. On the first track, he's playing those, what is it, 16 notes,
mhm.
and the groove is there, but Dave Holland's just floating along, but he's
And
there,
something
man.
that always catches my attention is when Miles is soloing on Peaceful, right? And Miles does
Right.
these little lines that I think, if I'm not wrong, he called them fidums. So it's
Hmm.
little notes that Miles did that were always like his staples, right?
Right.
During that song, he does a little lick that goes "Na da 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 da," and you can hear Dave Holland following the do 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 on the bass, and
Right.
it's like that interplay between the two of them, that brilliant chemistry of Dave Holland going from keeping a complete pocket to get stepping outside a little bit, stepping outside in the backyard and kind of like peeping at what Miles is doing and saying, "Hey, I can do a little bit of this too."
Hmm. I like also too that they didn't go for traditional bass in terms of jazz. It's a step away, which is obviously a nod to the New Directions concept for this record. They're not playing, they're not walking the bass, they're not playing swing. They're fucking grooving in the pocket of it, man. So I think that's fucking important for this record, compared to other previous releases from Prestige and and earlier Columbia's like ESP. Those are all upright
I
double
think
bass.
Dave Holland was sort of this natural evolution from Ron Carter's playing, right? You can hear Ron
Yeah,
Carter's playing
and
on the transitional records, and he's well, obviously he's Ron Carter, right? So he can swing like no one else, and he can play anything like no one else can. But Dave Holland just had a way of introducing slightly different aspects, and you can hear some of these influences in some of the later 1969 recordings that led right after in a silent way, but a little before Bitches Brew.
mhm,
One of the most famous ones is obviously the bootleg recordings live in Copenhagen,
right.
where it was the first time that we saw the transition from Tony Williams to Jack DeJohnette. And if you
Jack
if
DeJohnette played on these sessions, but I don't think he's
he's
on.
not on this record.
Yeah, he did play for the sessions though,
Yes, and obviously Jack DeJohnette's playing is very
than
different from
Tony.
Tony Williams.
Yeah,
But one thing that always strikes me is you can hear Dave Holland's sort of way of interplaying with the percussion, where
that's what I'm
when
saying.
he's with Tony, he's sort of like observing the fact that Tony is keeping this laid back groove, and he's just sort of going along with it and saying, "Well, I'm gonna sit right underneath you on this groove, and I'm gonna stay right here, and I'm gonna just sort of float right here, giving everybody else sort of like a musical leeway."
I think also too that it's a total step away from Paul Chambers also and Carter. So that way it seems fresh. It doesn't seem you put this on and the only thing that would make someone say this is jazz is probably Miles and Wayne. Everyone
I don't
else,
even think Miles would call it jazz,
I'm
knowing
sure he
him.
wouldn't. I'm sure he'd be offended by that statement, but um this is going to be filed under jazz. You walk into a record store, it's going to be filed under jazz, under Miles, whatever. Um,
I've always been fascinated by that misconception, right? Especially some of the records like Bitches Brew and like On the Corner, they're still labeled under jazz, and like that has nothing to do with jazz.
it's like, it doesn't matter. That's what I was saying earlier. Maybe it doesn't matter if it's rock or jazz or fusion. It's Miles, man. And if you're into Miles, you know what you're into, you know what you're getting into. So it's, I feel like that's what one of the things that I was talking to Tyree about one time when we were at work during their, this is Black History Month and whatever, and they're just playing like straight Michael Jackson, straight like oh Tyree was pissed off too because they were playing Queen like every
Oh
single fucking
man.
day for like every shift. They were playing Queen. Tyree was so pissed off, dude. He was like, I hate this song, man. He's like, I hate this song. I was like, dude, I was like, it's Black History Month, and they don't even play no jazz, no black artists that are like
No blue. That's
no
that's always
blues,
one aspect
no
about Black History Month that has perplexed me. It's like, what happened to Blue Note, Prestige,
Columbia. I mean,
Columbia? Like, where are
Eagles.
all those artists? Like, no one mentions them,
No
and
one.
it's part of the American sort of like ignorance towards the past. It's like you're trying to celebrate this event that you are at the same time so ignorant about that you don't even know the history of what you're trying to celebrate.
And that is, I feel like that's why I'm so like against these things. I mean,
Well,
it's not bad because obviously we're here doing a live show on Miles Davis and jazz in general, or whatever, all kinds of music. But for us, like we look up to Miles Davis. He's a fucking god to us, dude. And I don't look at Miles Davis and be like, he's a black man. I really don't. I don't care, dude.
but who does? Who that is serious about music and that cares about the art will label anything or anybody. That's like, oh, this is a black jazz or white jazz or a black artist interpretation or a white artist. It's always this unnecessary labeling of things. For Miles, his musicians were not black musicians; they were just musicians, which is why you saw many musicians of white, black races. It didn't matter for him because what mattered for him was the music, the sound. How does it sound? And does it sound good? Does it sound good? Does it sound great? Or does it not?
It's all good. Miles don't have a bad record, man.
Not a single one, that's for sure.
So that's one of the things that we would talk about is as something. It's probably a controversial thing to say, but you know, when it's you're celebrating culture and just
Skip
they
over.
skip over an entire period of probably the most important period in American music. Because I feel like maybe Americans could claim rock and roll a little bit between Chuck Berry and Elvis, Buddy Holly and whatever, Little Richard, but as soon as British invasion happens, oh, it's I see rock as more of an English thing. Personally, the pioneers of rock and roll may have been American, but the British did it damn right. They did it
Yeah,
fucking good too.
they innovated.
Oh, they had a fucking field day with it, didn't they?
Mm-hmm.
So
Well, we could talk about like those Led Zeppelin like 1 through 4, where like a lot of those songs are just like straight up interpretations from all other blues and rock songs, and it's just done so tastefully, and it's just done so like differently than what the Americans were doing at the time. Where you can
yeah,
see where like, well, that's the Americans might have started it, but man, the British, they finished it.
they and that's what is interesting too because there's a difference to say for example Dave Brubeck and I don't know.
Many people here in here at the what I like to call the Berkeley bubble of music.
Oh, Take Five is
It Take
Time
Five
Out. Time Out is one of those records.
is one of those records that are like that it's universally hated by a lot of the people that go to the school. Right?
Yeah,
They don't like Paul Desmond. They don't like how that sounds. They think it's straight up cultural appropriation, which kind of escapes me because in a way you could say that Time Out was sort of the more widely accepted jazz record, but at the same time, uh, it wasn't the only one that was. It wasn't even the only like legendary jazz record that was released in its time. I mean, we're talking 1959. You have Time Out, of course, but then you also have Kind of Blue. And guess what? Guess what you have right next to that? You have Mingus Aum right after,
yeah,
right next to that, and right next to that, what do you have? Ornette Coleman's "The Shape of Jazz to Come."
and
Four,
that's the free jazz period right there with
yeah,
Annette Coleman. But
four legendary jazz records
I think
had
that
nothing to do with each other.
it's funny too that you meant that we see Time Out as such a traditional kind of entry level jazz record that people get into when they start listening to jazz. Time Out is one of those records because it's all different time signatures. So
Yeah,
it's kind of funny. And
but
I
it's
mean, if
all
you know
done
the
with.
story about it, right? They were traveling through Europe or whatever in Turkey or whatever,
Yeah,
and they got inspired by the time
the
signatures.
and yeah, the dances
They're
that they
playing
were
during the
doing.
Cold War over there. They were the part of the jazz ambassadors for the Defense Department, I believe, or the State Department.
And I believe the quartet, um they were still trying to look for a bass player at the time, right before Timeout came out. And remind me, who is the bass player for Timeout again? I don't quite remember, but he formed part of the original quartet. Oh man, I'm trying to look for it.
Eugene Wright.
Eugene Wright. Thank you.
Yeah, we
So
all know.
guess what? Guess what? Uh, Dave Brubeck actually got pushback from, I don't remember it was if it was from the label or the audience, because of Eugene Wright. I don't need to mention why. We all know why. But that's one of the things that, like, when people say, "Oh, like Time Out, it's like cultural appropriation. It's like misappropriating genres." Like, the guy literally risked his whole career to make the record because he couldn't find a better bass player than Eugene Wright, who happened to be black. This
Ah,
is this is that thing of, like, music is music. It should never be politicized, even though music has been used as a politics tactic, as a
yeah,
political weapons.
that's a whole other conversation that we could go down for a couple
Mu-
hours.
Music, as we see it, as an art form, exists separately from sort of the mundane, like, useless conversations of, like, race and war and politics and all this. It's like music should never be about any of that. It should be
Yeah,
transcendental in a way. It's like
that's
it
one of the
transcends
things,
all. Mhm.
interesting. I wrote a whole paper on the jazz ambassadors during the Cold War, right? That was one of my finals for my Cold War class. I chose that topic specifically because I thought that was very important. The fact that they're sending black musicians to represent the United States in foreign countries that are, you know, under the influence of communist, you know, political views and whatnot. So uh, it's funny that they here obviously had to experience segregation and whatnot, and then travel to Europe and uh, like Africa. I think a couple people into Africa and Germany and whatever. There was not really any racism over there. So it just becomes this ironic thing where these great artists who are great Americans representing the country travel the world, and they're more better received. And in these other countries, there's no segregation when they travel over there. They don't have to enter through the back of the club. Miles Davis ain't gonna get his ass kicked for being black over there. And that's a whole other period we could talk about another time, is when he travels to
and
Paris.
and like, it is truly a sad thing, a tragic thing, when racism did get involved. I want to draw attention to an event that happened in the mid '60s. Saxophone player Eric Dolphy. He, at the
Right.
time, if I remember correctly, he was playing with Mingus,
Uh-huh.
and he died in, I think it was Germany at the time. He died of what was believed to be a, uh something related to maybe diabetes, if I'm not wrong, where he had low insulin, and he had passed out, and they put him in a hospital bed, and the hospital staff essentially assumed that he was a drug addict,
Oh,
which,
wow.
wrong assumption, because none, or almost none, of the members of Mingus band, including Mingus themselves, were addicted to any drug. As Mingus was very open about his strictness when it came to substance in his band. He didn't want any members who had issues, and Eric Dolphy had never even consumed alcohol or any substances. And because of that racism, that tragedy occurred, and Eric Dolphy tragically passed away in 1965.
See, this is a whole conversation we could have about black musicians in America during the 1960s. It's 1950s, 1960s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, whatever. It was there, it was present. And these artists rose above that. And that's one of the things that I feel Miles Davis represents, the better,
Well,
the
even Miles himself,
better
during 1959, he had an unfortunate encounter with the police when
That's what
he
I
was
was
outside of a
referencing
show.
earlier. They kicked his ass, man. They
Yeah,
arrested him.
And all because they assumed that he was just loitering. Well, he was the front runner. He was playing. And these are some of the tragedies that certainly cannot be overlooked. But at the same time, it cannot be a reason to weaponize music or use it in a political manner, because
Yeah,
none of these artists, even Eric Dolphy or Miles Davis, none of them would have wanted their music to be used as a weapon.
that's something too that I wanted to argue before. Um, I'm trying to get back on that thought. What exactly my argument was? It was something about how people say like the Rolling Stones stole from blues artists like Howlin' Wolf and Muddy Waters and whatever, that they totally ripped them off, that they're unoriginal. I mean, I don't really. They covered the songs, right? I don't want to say they ripped them off because they did their own rendition of it, and they even invited some of these artists to play. I believe they played in England with Howlin' Wolf, and they did a live show with him. And it's kind of funny because a lot of times America has these artists and they don't pay them no mind, bro. It takes other people to show appreciation for these artists and for their music for the rest of the world to take notice.
And it takes, in general, it just takes time for the world to, and even America, to move on from like those obsolete and archaic conventions of culture and race and people into unifying. And it still takes time. I would say that America right now, it's better, way better than it used to be when it came to those issues, even though some people would like to think otherwise.
Even though the music kind of sucks now.
And yes, the music kind of does suck a little bit. Well, some of the music being made is really great, especially some of the new Blue Note releases and some of the stuff that they're doing over in Britain with electronic music.
Yeah, you know,
But in
good
general,
music is far and few.
in general, as America has done away with those archaic conventions, it has now tried to bring them up to the light, to the spotlight, in a way that for me is less than acceptable, because we're trying to bring it all back. But instead of saying, well, this is how it used to be and we should come up with a way for things to be different, we say, well, this is how it used to be, and we just start taking sides and blaming people again, which doesn't really work like that.
Right.
And for
So
music, it's even worse because, like nowadays, music, the good music that you can still find, it's a kaleidoscope of ideas. I mean, one of my favorite records that I've heard recently was Floating Points Promises with the London Symphony Orchestra and Pharoah Sanders. And throughout that whole record, you can hear a mashup of different influences from jazz to blues to electronic to disco, everything in a single record that focuses more on subtlety and nuance.
yeah, you know what is worth mentioning too? I just want to mention on my behalf of like a Native American influence on American music, on jazz and rock too. Uh, Not just that it's black or white, but I feel like also too people forget that the natives had very, very influential uh, effects on black artists, white artists. It's funny too. They what was it? I want to think of the quote that he says. Something kind of funny that Ozzy Osbourne says. He's like, "Oh, I like playing with Mexicans and like Indians or whatever." He's like, "I feel like they have better timing, better feel, better soul, things like that." Um, I think he loves that guy Rob Trujillo from Metallica when he was playing with Ozzy. He loves that guy. Ozzy loves him. Also, too, Jesse Ed Davis. He's a fucking badass guitar player. If you ever watched that Rolling Stones Rock and Roll Circus, I believe he plays there.
Mhm.
Um, he plays on that song with Jackson Brown, Doctor My Eyes. He's the one that he got the solo on that song. That guy can rip, dude. That guy can fucking rip. So at that point, it's like it goes back to what we're saying. It doesn't matter who you are, where you're from, as your name's gonna be on the credits for whatever you play, but shit, you can play whatever the hell you want. It's funny too that we mentioned this too because it's same like session musicians. A lot of them were playing rock music or what they some people would consider black music, and they were all white people playing that music because they all played jazz. The
Hmm.
best session musicians of the 1960s played jazz, man. So
Oh man,
it's a loaded
it
conversation right
it
here.
all circles back to the message of
The music.
the music and what Miles wanted to do, what his ultimate musical goal was unity through sound, and something that I feel was accomplished not only in almost every, if not every single record that he made, but especially on the beginning of the electric period where Miles went from straight ahead jazz to transition to completely free, completely out of the box thinking, and doing away with all the obsolete terms and conventions and traditions and all the things that many people would like to hold near and dear to their heart. Miles said, well, screw that. We're not doing that. We're doing something else. And that's what made him Miles, man.
We're
That's
gonna do it my way too.
he gonna do it his way, and you ain't gonna do nothing about it.
Fuck it. I love Miles, dude. I want a poster of Miles in my room somewhere. I don't have a poster of Miles, but I
I want
sure would
some
love to have
I
one.
want some big like aluminum print, one of those expensive ones, man. That's what I want, man. The one
Big
from
old classic.
which one would it be? There's a photo by Francis Wolff that's like amazing. It's like Miles on a stage, and it's all dark except for his figure and the microphone, and it's just him
Mhm.
holding the trumpet and the microphone right next to him, and it's such a fantastic photo.
Yeah, man. Shit.
Well,
Say, you got any new records lately?
I'm still waiting on the ones that I order. Electric Bird, they just shipped today, actually.
Yeah. Did you see that Donald Byrd record I sent you sold out?
Chant.
Yeah, Chance sold
Yeah,
out.
yeah, that one sold out. But I think Blue Note might repress that one. They're working
Probably.
towards repressing some of the stuff that they missed from a couple of years ago. For example, uh,
Well, they got backed up during
Bird in
COVID.
Flight. Bird in Flight is set to be repressed.
Oh,
So
finally. You
once that
got
get
that one already,
repressed,
right?
I'm gonna get that one once it gets repressed.
Shit.
I don't have it unfortunately.
You never got a Duke Pearson the Phantom, right?
I did not get that one.
You should get that one. I love that record. I don't know, a lot of people don't really talk about it, but that's one of my favorite Blue Note releases.
You know,
It
speaking
has
of
a
Duke Pearson, I found out about this recently. You know the album Extensions by McCoy Tyner?
yeah,
Guess who produced it?
Duke.
Hmm.
Interesting.
It was produced by him, recorded at Rudy Van Gelder's.
Oh, that's another thing we should talk about sometime. Just the recording process about these records. It's just so good.
Honestly, man, especially well, we could talk about any. You know what? We should choose another Blue Note record for next week. What do you think?
Which one? A Blue Note?
Hmm. Something from Blue Note. I am thinking. Now he sings, now he sobs.
Ah, that's a good
You know,
one.
we go from Miles Davis to Chick Corea, who also played in this record.
We got a request for the Kids of Windy High album next week. We'll consider it, but possibly. Let's see what else we could we do, because I was thinking that's a pretty good
That one's pretty good. That one's pretty good. Now he
one
sings, now he
too.
subs.
Now he sings and he
Um,
sobs.
I would say Speak No Evil is another good one.
You know what I think is a good one?
Tell me.
Headhunters.
Ooh, but that one's later though.
That is
That
later.
that
I
one's
mean,
Colombia.
we're not we're not going chronologically. Who cares? But we do whatever we want here.
All right,
Ah,
so
I'm still looking though, man. I want to go through. I kind of want to do something rock too, though.
ooh, something rock.
I kind of I don't know, man. Uh, you gotta check out those Jeff Beck records I've been telling you about, dude.
I have to check that out. That's been in my pipeline for like oh, good while, man.
For about a year.
About a year, man. Yeah,
I
this
checked
guy,
it out every
him
month.
and Johnny, man, he just keep telling me like, you gotta listen to Jeff Beck. And I'm like, I listen to it. I
It's
get
not
to it.
just Jeff Beck. That's why, like, I'm trying to tell you, like, the rhythm section he plays with is fucking so complimentary to his playing. You just got to check it out.
I'll check it out. I promise I'll check it out. I just once I want to have time to fully explore it and not just like skim over the songs like they're nothing.
Yeah. I'm thinking if we should go something modern because we're kind of like going back and forth from like modern to rock to jazz. I mean, it doesn't really matter necessarily. Papa Sullivan says Black Sabbath next week. What you think? You want to do some Black Sabbath?
Paranoid
Paranoid's good.
debut.
Master of Reality.
I'd like, you know what? I'd like to. Master of Reality is great. Debut is great too.
They're
I
both.
have to. We could do debut.
Mm,
What do you think?
mm. Me and Dylan love the debut. Black Sabbath. Black Sabbath.
I think it shall be
It was
Black
funny.
Sabbath
I was playing.
title.
I was playing that record with Vanessa, and she's like, "I think we could play something else now." It was kind of funny. She's like, "This is a little too much for me."
Well, Black Sabbath self-title. Then it
You
is
want to
for
do
next week.
self-titled, or do you want to do?
I'll
I
do
I
self.
kind of want to do Master of Reality.
Ooh, we're at crossroads. What shall we choose? Oof.
Which one? Which one should we do? Or I don't know. We could go halfway to Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath,
Uh,
Volume 4,
you know
Paranoid.
what? You know what? Master of Reality. How about that? We'll do that one.
Oh, Paranoid's really good too, though.
You
Hmm.
know, I have an original pressing of that one. My stepdad got it. He got it from this guy. He's like, I have no use for it. And I was like, that's a bad decision for the guy, but a great deal for me.
Right, right.
What do you
Shit.
say, Master of Reality for next week?
All right. Yeah, we should. I wish we could get Dylan in on this because Dylan knows a lot more about Tony
He
Iommi.
and he
He
knows,
knows these
and
songs
both
so
you guys
well.
know way more about Black Sabbath than I do.
Yeah, that is
So
true.
maybe if we can get him as a guest next week, it'd be nice. Try to see if we can hit him up.
Mm. Yeah, but he doesn't have like any mic set up or anything.
He can be with you.
Maybe if he wants to.
Yeah, ask him.
I'll ask him later. So we'll see.
Well, all right, everyone. This has been episode 4. It has been a motherfucking pleasure.
Peace out.
Later.
Later.